I was standing on platform 7 at Penn Station, my mother's rosary beads tangled in my coat pocket, when my phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. Grace, your daughters are here. They retaking everything. They retelling people Yudvi had a breakdown. My name is Grace Townsend. I'm 58 years old, I teach American literature at a community college in Manhattan, and I'd just spent 3 days watching my mother die in a nursing home in Albany. Margaret Catherine Townsend, devout Catholic, devoted grandmother, the woman who'd raised me to believe that mercy was the highest virtue, had finally let go. I was on my way to bury her when my neighbor's text arrived. My daughters Simone and Audrey weren't at the funeral. They were at my rent-controlled apartment on West 83rd Street with a moving truck, police officers, and a story about their unstable mother who needed to be protected from herself. They were removing my furniture, my photographs, my life, piece by piece, while telling everyone who'd listen that I'd lost my mind. The train to Albany was leaving in 7 minutes. I could get on it, bury my mother with dignity, and deal with my daughters later, or I could turn around, go home, and stop whatever was happening before it was too late. I got on the train, but not because I was running away. What my daughters didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd been expecting something like this for years. Ever since my divorce from their father in 1991, ever since he'd tried to take custody by claiming I was mentally unfit, I'd known that someday they'd try to finish what he'd started. They'd grown up hearing whispers about their too emotional mother, their dramatic mother, their mother who felt things too deeply to be trusted with real responsibility. They'd learned from the best. David Townsend had been a master manipulator, and my own mother had been his willing accomplice. For years, I'd suspected something was wrong. The way my daughters looked at me, the careful distance they maintained, the way they managed me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. But I'd told myself I was paranoid, that I was seeing shadows where there was only light. I was wrong. There were shadows, and they were about to swallow me whole. When I returned from burying my mother, from standing in a cold cemetery and watching them lower the woman who'd birthed me into frozen ground, I walked into my apartment to find it gutted. My mother's antique writing desk, the one she'd promised me when I was 16, was gone. The photographs that had lined my hallway were torn, my face ripped away from the people I'd loved, and my daughters were sitting on my couch, surrounded by boxes with a psychiatrist's business card and talk of getting me help. They had it all planned out. The narrative about my deteriorating mental health, the witnesses who'd heard me acting strange, the doctor who was ready to sign off on an emergency psychiatric evaluation. They even had legal documents drawn up, power of attorney, conservatorship papers, everything they'd need to take control of my life and my assets. What they didn't have was the truth. Because 3 days after I buried my mother, while clearing out her nursing home room, I found letters. Dozens of them. Letters between my mother and my ex-husband, spanning from 1987 to 1991, detailing their conspiracy to prove I was an unfit mother. Letters between my mother and my daughters, written over the past decade, poisoning them against me with carefully constructed lies about my instability, my episodes, my dangerous behavior. My own mother had spent years teaching my daughters to fear me, to see me as someone who needed to be controlled, managed, neutralized. And now, with her dead and buried, they were simply finishing what she'd started. I could have used those letters to destroy them. I could have gone to court, filed charges, exposed every lie and manipulation. I could have made sure everyone knew exactly what they'd done. But here's what they didn't understand about me, about the woman they'd so carefully tried to paint as weak and unstable. I wasn't fragile. I was strong. Strong enough to fight back with the law, with evidence, with the cold precision they thought they'd inherited exclusively from their father. And strong enough to offer them something I'd never been offered. A choice. A chance to face what they'd done, and decide who they wanted to be. I filed an emergency motion for the return of my property. I got a restraining order. I documented every lie, every theft, every manipulation. And when we stood in that courtroom 3 days later, me on one side, my daughters, and their 3 lawyers on the other, I watched a judge systematically dismantle the narrative they'd spent years constructing. "You're not concerned," Judge Maria Henderson told my daughters, her voice cold with disgust. "You're calculating, and this court sees through it." I won, legally, completely, devastatingly. But winning in court doesn't heal a family. It doesn't answer the question that kept me awake at night. How do you love people who tried to erase you? How do you extend mercy to daughters who showed you none? My mother used to say that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the hardest strength there is. She'd tell me this while fingering those rosary beads, while choosing grace over grudges, while forgiving people who didn't deserve her kindness. I'd always thought she was just making excuses for people who hurt her. But standing in my half-empty apartment with my daughter's betrayal fresh as a wound, I had to figure out what kind of woman I wanted to be. The kind who destroys her enemies? Or the kind who remembers that before they were enemies, they were hers? Two girls she'd rocked to sleep? Two souls she'd promised to love without condition? This is the story of what happened when I had to choose between being right and being merciful. When I discovered that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's refusing to become the person they accused you of being. When I learned that you can extend grace without letting people destroy you, that boundaries aren't walls, and that the strongest thing you can do is survive without bitterness. This is the story of how my daughters tried to steal my life, and how I took it back. Not with anger, but with something far more powerful: the truth. This is the story of three women, a mother, a daughter, and a grandmother. And the lies that bound them, the betrayals that broke them, and the mercy that might, just might, save them all. Because in the end, I had to answer one question. Do I destroy them the way they tried to destroy me? Or do I find another way to be whole? The answer would surprise us all. I've always hated Penn Station. There's something about the fluorescent lights and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with human desperation that makes you feel like you're trapped in the waiting room of purgatory. But that Thursday morning in late October, standing on Platform 7 with my overnight bag digging into my shoulder and my mother's rosary beads creating a small lump in my coat pocket, I would have given anything to stay there forever. Because at least in Penn Station, I didn't have to face what was waiting for me in Albany. My mother, Margaret Catherine Townsend, had died 3 days earlier in her sleep. A small mercy, the hospice nurse had called it, as if death could be measured in degrees of kindness. She was 82 years old, had buried a husband and raised 3 children, and had spent the last year of her life in a nursing home that smelled like disinfectant and gave up. I'd visited every Sunday, taking the Amtrak up from the city, sitting beside her bed while she drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mistaking me for her sister Rose, sometimes for nobody at all. The funeral was scheduled for Friday morning at St. Catherine's, the small Catholic church where she'd taken communion every week for 60 years. Father Dominic would preside. There would be prayers, hymns, the smell of incense mixing with old wood and older grief. My brothers would fly in from California and Texas respectively, men I barely recognized anymore, men who'd left New York decades ago and never looked back. My daughters had both texted their condolences but made it clear they couldn't take time off work. Grandma wouldn't want us to disrupt our lives, Simone had written, as if my mother's death was a minor inconvenience, like a delayed subway train. I didn't argue. I'd stopped arguing with my daughters years ago, right around the time they'd started looking at me with that particular expression, the one that said they were waiting for me to embarrass them, to be too loud or too emotional or too much of whatever I'd always been. Their father had looked at me that way too, near the end. David Townsend, who'd promised me forever in a courthouse in 1985 and delivered 15 years before deciding I wasn't the upgrade he'd been hoping for. The platform was crowded with the usual Thursday morning chaos. A businessman in a rumpled suit stood too close to the edge, checking his watch every 30 seconds like he could will the train into existence. A young couple argued in whispers. The girl's mascara smudged, the boy's hands shoved deep in his pockets. An elderly woman with a shopping cart full of belongings sat on a bench, talking to herself or to God, I couldn't tell which. I checked my phone. 8:47 a.m. The train was delayed, of course. Everything in New York is always delayed, always just out of reach. I thought about calling Simone, maybe Audrey, just to hear their voices, to feel like I had daughters who cared that I was about to bury my mother alone. But I knew how that conversation would go. Simone would be in a meeting. Audrey would be at some breakfast event, networking with the kind of people who measured human worth in LinkedIn connections. My phone buzzed. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe it was one of them. Maybe they'd changed their minds. Maybe. But it was Mrs. Chen, Eleanor Chen, my neighbor in 4C, a woman who'd lived across the hall from me for 15 years and had somehow become more family than my own blood. The text was short, just one line, but it hit me like a physical blow. Grace, your daughters are here. They're taking everything. They're telling people you've had a breakdown. I read it 3 times before my brain would process the words. Then I called her, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Eleanor?" My voice came out strange, high and tight. "Grace, thank God." She was whispering, which meant she was still in the hallway, probably pressed against her door. "They showed up an hour ago with a moving truck. A real truck, Grace, like the kind you use when you're emptying an entire apartment. They have keys." "I gave them keys," I said stupidly. "For emergencies. They're telling everyone who'll listen that you've lost your mind, that you've been having delusions, that you're a danger to yourself. Mrs. Patterson asked if you were okay. And Simone, Grace, she actually cried. Real tears. She said you'd been threatening to hurt yourself." The platform tilted. I reached out and grabbed a metal column, feeling the cold through my gloves. "That's not... I know, honey, I know. But they're very convincing. They have paperwork. Medical documents, they said. They're taking your mother's desk, Grace. The antique one. The one my mother had promised me when I was 16 years old. Sitting in her kitchen in Bay Ridge, drinking tea from chipped cups while she told me stories about my grandmother. The desk where she'd written letters to my father during the war, where she'd balanced the family checkbook, where she'd helped me with my homework when I was struggling through high school. The desk that was supposed to be mine. "I'm coming back," I said. "Don't let them take anything else." "Grace, they have police with them." The world stopped. "What?" "2 officers. They said it's a welfare check, that they're concerned for your safety. Simone told them you'd been drinking heavily, that you'd called her in the middle of the night talking about ending things. Grace, she's building a case. This isn't just about furniture. This is about control," I finished. "This is about taking control. What do you want me to do?" I looked at the departure board. The 9:05 to Albany was now scheduled for 9:20. If I got on that train, I'd be in Albany by noon, at the funeral home by 1, at the church by 4 for the viewing. I'd bury my mother tomorrow morning, stand beside her grave with my brothers who barely knew me anymore, and then I'd take the train back to New York on Saturday, back to whatever remained of my life. Or I could turn around right now. I could go home. I could face my daughters and their lies and their moving truck and their police escort. I could fight. My mother's voice echoed in my head, that soft Brooklyn accent she never quite lost. "Gracie, baby, sometimes the bravest thing is to let go. Sometimes you gotta choose your battles." But this wasn't a battle. This was war. And they'd fired the first shot while I was standing on a train platform, grieving. "Take pictures," I told Eleanor. "Everything they take, photograph it. Get witnesses. Anyone who'll talk to you, Mrs. Patterson, the Kowalskis, that young couple in 3B. Get statements. Written, if possible. And Eleanor, thank you. Thank you for telling me. Where are you going?" "To bury my mother," I said. "And then I'm coming home to deal with my daughters." I hung up before she could respond. The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a blast of warm, stale air. People surged forward, pushing and jostling, everyone desperate to get wherever they were going. I stood there, frozen, torn between 2 impossible choices. Then I felt it, that small lump in my pocket. I reached in and pulled out my mother's rosary. The beads were worn smooth from decades of prayers, the crucifix slightly tarnished. She'd carried these beads through my father's death, through my divorce, through every crisis and small tragedy that makes up a human life. She'd pressed them into my hand 2 weeks ago, when she could still speak, when she'd looked at me with clear eyes and said, "For the hard days, Gracie. For when you need to remember who you are." I got on the train, but I wasn't running away. I was giving myself time to think, to plan, to figure out how to fight back against 2 women who thought their expensive educations and their Park Avenue apartments made them smarter than the mother who'd raised them. They thought I was weak. They thought grief had made me vulnerable. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The train car was only half full, which felt like a small mercy. I found a window seat and shoved my bag into the overhead compartment with more force than necessary. My hands were still shaking. An older man across the aisle glanced at me with concern, but I looked away, pressing my forehead against the cold glass as the train lurched forward and Penn Station fell away behind us. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text after text, notification after notification. I silenced it but couldn't help looking at the screen. 3 missed calls from Simone, 2 from Audrey, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Townsend, this is Officer Mitchell from the 20th Precinct. We need to speak with you regarding a wellness check. Please call us back." A wellness check. They'd actually weaponized the police, turned them into props in their little performance. I wondered what Simone had told them, what lies she'd constructed, what evidence she'd manufactured. My daughter, the lawyer, who'd learned early that the person who tells the story first usually wins. I thought about calling my brothers, Michael in San Diego, Thomas in Houston. But what would I say? Your nieces are trying to steal everything while I'm burying our mother? They'd tell me I was being dramatic. They'd say Simone and Audrey were just concerned, just trying to help. They'd use that careful, patronizing tone they'd developed over the years, the one that said, "There she goes again, emotional Grace, unstable Grace, Grace who feels everything too much." The train picked up speed as we left Manhattan, passing through the tunnel into the Bronx. Gray buildings and graffiti-covered walls blurred past. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, tried to do the meditation exercises my therapist had taught me. Dr. Rashid. God, they'd even mentioned him to Eleanor. As if my going to therapy, something I'd done after the divorce, something healthy and normal, was proof of instability. I'd seen Dr. Rashid for 2 years, from 2018 to 2020. We'd talked about my marriage, about the way David had slowly eroded my sense of self, about setting boundaries with my daughters, who'd been in their 20s and already showing signs of the cold calculation they'd inherited from their father. Dr. Rashid had helped me understand that I wasn't broken. That feeling deeply wasn't a weakness. That my daughter's discomfort with my emotions was their problem, not mine. I'd stopped therapy because I felt better, because I'd done the work. But Simone had always thrown it in my face during arguments. "Maybe you should go back to Dr. Rashid, Mom. Maybe you need medication." As if wanting her to visit more than twice a year, as if being hurt when she forgot my birthday, as if any normal human emotion was evidence of pathology. The conductor came through asking for tickets. I fumbled in my purse, my hands still unsteady, and handed him the paper ticket I'd printed at home. He punched it, handed it back, moved on. Outside, the city was giving way to suburbs, houses with small yards, cars parked in driveways, the ordinary Thursday morning life of people who weren't having their lives dismantled by their own children. I forced myself to open the texts. Simone, "Mom, we're at your apartment. We're concerned about you. Please call us." Audrey, "Mom, where are you? We love you and want to help." Simone again, "The police are here. They need to speak with you. This is serious." Audrey, "Mom, this is really scary. Please let us know you're okay." The performance was impressive. Anyone reading these texts would think they were loving daughters, desperate with worry. They'd crafted the narrative so carefully. I could almost admire it, if it weren't destroying my life. I typed out a response, deleted it, typed another. Finally settled on, "I'm fine. On my way to bury my mother. Stay out of my apartment." The reply came within seconds. Simone, "Mom, that's exactly what we're worried about. You're not thinking clearly. You need rest. We've arranged for you to stay somewhere safe when you get back." Somewhere safe. The phrase made my skin crawl. What did that mean? A hospital? A facility? Had they actually started commitment proceedings? Could they do that? I thought about what I knew about conservatorships, about involuntary commitment. Not much. It seemed like something from movies, from tabloid stories about pop stars and their controlling families. But Simone would know. Simone, who'd gone to Columbia Law, who worked at a firm that specialized in estate planning and elder law. Simone, who'd probably been planning this for months. The thought stopped me cold. Months. Had this been brewing that long? I tried to remember conversations, moments when things had felt off. There'd been that dinner in August, at some expensive restaurant in Tribeca that Audrey had insisted on. They'd both been there with their husbands, Trevor and Marcus, men who smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. They'd asked careful questions about my finances, about my plans for retirement, about whether I'd thought about downsizing. "That apartment is so big for just you, Mom," Audrey had said, twirling pasta on her fork. "And rent control won't last forever. Have you thought about what you'll do when the building goes co-op?" I'd brushed it off, told them I was fine, that I loved my apartment, that I wasn't going anywhere. Trevor had exchanged a look with Simone. I'd seen it, but hadn't understood it. Now I wondered, was that when they'd started planning? Had they already decided I was an obstacle to be removed? The train rocked gently as we passed through Yonkers. I watched the Hudson River appear on the left, gray and cold under the October sky. My mother had loved this train ride. Back when I was young, back when she could still travel, we'd taken this route to visit her sister in Poughkeepsie. She'd always chosen a window seat, always pointed out landmarks, the Tappan Zee Bridge, the cliffs at Bear Mountain. the places where the river widened into something that looked almost like freedom. I pulled out the rosary again, running the beads through my fingers without really praying. I'd never been as devout as my mother. I went to Mass on Christmas and Easter, more out of habit than faith, but she'd believed with her whole heart. Even at the end, even when the cancer was eating through her bones and the morphine made her see things that weren't there, she'd asked for a priest, had taken communion one last time. Faith isn't about being sure, Gracie, she told me once when I was maybe 17 and full of teenage atheism. It's about believing anyway, about choosing hope even when it's hard. I'd rolled my eyes then, thought she was naive, thought faith was just another word for denial. But now, sitting on this train with my life falling apart, I understood a little better. Hope wasn't weakness. It was defiance. It was looking at impossible odds and deciding to fight anyway. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Eleanor. They just left. Took 3 boxes, the desk, and some paintings. I got pictures. Mrs. Patterson gave a statement. She heard them talking to the police. They said you'd been deteriorating since your divorce, that you'd become increasingly paranoid and delusional. Grace, they're building a paper trail. I thanked her, told her I'd be back Saturday at the latest, asked her to keep an eye on my door. Then I called the one person I thought might actually help. Raymond Kellerman answered on the 3rd ring. Grace Townsend. It's been what, 5 years? 6, I said. Since the divorce settlement. Raymond, I need help. What kind of help? I told him everything. About the funeral, about the text from Eleanor, about my daughters and the moving truck and the police and the careful construction of a narrative that painted me as unstable. Raymond listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always liked about him. He was old school, a lawyer who'd grown up in Queens back when it was still working class, who'd put himself through law school at night while working construction during the day. He understood people like me, people who'd fought for everything they had, who'd been underestimated and counted out and had survived anyway. They have keys to your apartment? He asked when I finished. I gave them keys years ago, for emergencies. This constitutes illegal entry and possibly theft. Did they have your permission to remove property? No. Good, that's clear-cut. The police being there complicates things, but if they were there for a wellness check and not for an eviction or legal action, then your daughters still acted without authority. He paused and I heard papers rustling. Grace, I'm going to be straight with you. What they're doing, the narrative building, the involvement of police, the claims of mental instability, this looks like the groundwork for a guardianship or conservatorship petition. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? I'm 58 years old. I'm not incompetent. No, you're not. But if they can convince a judge that you're a danger to yourself, that you're not capable of managing your affairs, they could get temporary authority. It's hard, but not impossible. Especially if they have a sympathetic doctor willing to sign off on an evaluation. They mentioned Dr. Rashid, but I haven't seen him in years. Doesn't matter. They'll find someone. Grace, where are you right now? On a train to Albany. My mother's funeral is tomorrow. Good. Stay there. Bury your mother. Take your time. Meanwhile, I'm going to file an emergency motion for the return of property and a restraining order preventing them from accessing your apartment or spreading defamatory statements. I'll need you to document everything. Every item they took, every conversation, every text message. Can you do that? Yes. And Grace, when you get back to New York, come straight to my office. Don't go home first. We need to get ahead of this. I promised I would and hung up. Outside, the landscape was changing, the suburbs giving way to smaller towns, then to stretches of forest and farmland. The river stayed constant on the left, a gray ribbon marking the path north. I opened my notes app and started documenting everything I could remember. The timeline of the morning, Eleanor's texts, the items she'd said they took. I screenshotted every message from Simone and Audrey, every call from the unknown police number. I wrote down names. Mrs. Patterson, the Kowalskis, the young couple in 3B who'd once told me they thought Simone was kind of intense. 2 hours into the ride, somewhere past Poughkeepsie, I finally let myself cry. Not the elegant, controlled tears I'd shed at the nursing home, but the ugly, gasping kind. The kind that came from rage as much as grief. I pressed my face against the window and let it all out. The fury at my daughters, the pain of losing my mother, the fear of what came next. The older man across the aisle pretended not to notice, but when I finally stopped and looked up, there was a small package of tissues on the armrest between us. I took them, wiped my face, mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded once and went back to his newspaper. That small kindness, from a stranger, from someone who owed me nothing, felt like a lifeline, like proof that not everyone in the world was cruel, not everyone was out to take from you. I held on to that feeling as the train continued north, as Albany grew closer, as the day my mother had died 3 years preparing for finally arrived. By the time we pulled into Albany Rensselaer Station at 11:43 a.m., I'd made a decision. I would bury my mother with the dignity and love she deserved. I would stand beside her grave and say goodbye properly. And then I would go back to New York and I would fight, not with emotion, not with tears or pleading, or the desperate hope that my daughters would remember who I was, who I'd been to them. No, I would fight with the law, with documentation, with the cold, calculated precision they thought they'd inherited exclusively from their father. I would show them exactly where they got their strength from. And it wasn't from him. The funeral home in Albany smelled like lilies and lies. That particular combination of artificial air freshening and formaldehyde that's supposed to mask death, but only makes it more obvious. I arrived at 1:15 p.m., my overnight bag still in my hand, my eyes swollen from crying on the train, but my spine straight. Mr. Donnelly, the funeral director, met me in the foyer with the practiced expression of mournful professionalism. He was perhaps 70, with soft hands and a voice like velvet over concrete. Ms. Townsend, I'm so very sorry for your loss. Your mother was a remarkable woman. He'd never met my mother. This was just the script. But I thanked him anyway, because that's what you do. You follow the rituals, you say the expected things, you pretend that death can be managed with the right flower arrangements and the correct font on the memorial cards. Your brothers arrived this morning, he said, guiding me down a carpeted hallway. They're in the viewing room with Father Dominic. I hadn't seen Michael or Thomas in 3 years. We'd drifted apart after the divorce, not from any specific falling out. Just the natural erosion that happens when siblings build separate lives in different time zones. They sent Christmas cards. I sent birthday texts. We were related but not close, connected by blood and shared history but not much else. The viewing room was small, tasteful, with dark wood paneling and soft lighting designed to make everything look peaceful. My mother lay in a simple oak casket. Her choice, specified in documents she'd prepared 15 years ago when my father died. She wore her navy dress, the one she'd saved for special occasions. Her hair was styled the way she'd worn it for 40 years, short and practical. Someone had put lipstick on her, a shade too pink, but otherwise she looked like herself, smaller somehow. Death had taken something essential and left behind just the shell. Michael stood near the casket, hands clasped in front of him. He'd put on weight, his suit straining across his middle, his hair almost entirely gray now. Thomas sat in one of the chairs against the wall, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered, and I saw David in his face. That same expression of mild annoyance, like my presence was an interruption. Grace, Michael said, coming forward to hug me. He smelled like airport and aftershave. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I lied. Because what else was there to say? I'm being systematically dismantled by your nieces while burying our mother. I hugged him back, felt his hand pat my shoulder twice, the universal masculine gesture of uncomfortable sympathy. Thomas nodded at me from his chair but didn't get up. Flight okay? Train, I corrected. I took the train. Father Dominic emerged from a side door and suddenly we were all business, discussing the order of service, the readings, the hymns. My mother had left specific instructions. She wanted Psalm 23, the Our Father, Ave Maria sung if possible. She wanted to be buried next to my father in the Catholic cemetery on the edge of town, under the oak tree they'd picked out together in 1998. She was very clear about her wishes, Father Dominic said gently. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with kind eyes and the slight Boston accent of someone who'd come to upstate New York from somewhere else. She spoke often about her faith sustaining her, about trusting in God's plan even when it was difficult to understand. I wanted to ask him if God's plan included my daughters trying to declare me incompetent, but I kept my mouth shut. This wasn't the time. This wasn't the place. The viewing lasted 4 hours. People came in shifts, neighbors from my mother's old street, women from her prayer group, former co-workers from the school cafeteria where she'd worked for 25 years. They told stories about her kindness, her humor, her strength. They hugged me and said I looked just like her. They asked about my daughters. They couldn't make it, I said each time, the lie tasting like ash. Work obligations. Michael and Thomas didn't contradict me. They'd learned long ago not to ask questions about my relationship with Simone and Audrey. There was an unspoken agreement in our family that we didn't examine the cracks too closely. We smoothed things over, we kept moving, we pretended everything was fine even when it was crumbling. Around 6 p.m., after the last visitor had left, the three of us went to dinner at a small Italian place near the funeral home. The kind of restaurant that's been there for 40 years, with red checkered tablecloths and photos of the owner's family covering every wall. We ordered pasta and wine, and for a little while we tried to remember how to be siblings. "Remember when Mom made us go to Mass every single Sunday?" Thomas said, twirling spaghetti on his fork. "Even when we were teenagers and wanted to sleep in?" "She'd come in at 7 a.m. with that wooden spoon," Michael added, smiling, "banging on the door like the world was ending. And Dad would just laugh," I said quietly. He'd sit at the kitchen table drinking coffee, and when we'd come out all grumpy, he'd say, "Don't fight your mother, boys. She's got God on her side." We were quiet for a moment, remembering. Then Thomas broke the silence. "What are you going to do with her stuff? The nursing home said they need the room cleared by the end of the month." "I'll handle it," I said. "We should split the estate 3 ways," Michael said. It wasn't a question. "Whatever's left after the nursing home bills, that seems fair." Fair. As if life had ever been fair. As if our mother hadn't spent her last years in a facility that cost $6,000 a month. As if there was anything left to split. "There's the house," Thomas said. "The one in Bay Ridge. She never sold it after Dad died, just rented it out. That's worth something." I'd forgotten about the house. The small 2-bedroom in Brooklyn where we'd grown up. Where my mother had raised us on my father's pension and her cafeteria wages. She'd held on to it all these years, some combination of sentiment and stubbornness, refusing to sell even when the offers got ridiculous, even when the neighborhood gentrified and the house became worth 10 times what they'd paid for it in 1972. "We'll need to talk to a lawyer," Michael continued. "Figure out the probate situation. Mom had a will, right?" "Yes," I said. "Everything's in order." What I didn't say was that I'd helped her write that will. That I'd sat with her 5 years ago, while she'd carefully divided everything she had. The house split 3 ways between her children. Her savings, what little remained, divided equally. Her personal effects left to me, because I was the only one who'd cared enough to visit regularly, the only one who'd held her hand while she died. That desk they'd taken from my apartment? That was mine. Legally, specifically mine. She'd written it down, had it notarized. For Grace, who loves words as much as I did. "Grace?" Michael was looking at me strangely. "You okay?" "Just tired," I said. "It's been a long day." We finished dinner without much more conversation. Michael paid the check, and we went back to our respective hotels. They were staying at a Holiday Inn near the highway. I'd booked a room at a small bed and breakfast closer to the church, the kind of place with doilies on every surface and a guest book in the hallway. In my room, I finally allowed myself to check my phone. 17 missed calls, 34 text messages, 3 voicemails. I listened to the first voicemail. It was Simone, her voice tight with what might have been concern, or might have been controlled rage. With her, it was always hard to tell. "Mom, this is getting out of hand. We've been trying to reach you all day. The police came back. They're filing a missing persons report if you don't contact us by tonight. We're worried sick. Please, just call us. We love you. We're trying to help." The second voicemail was Audrey crying, or at least making crying sounds. "Mom, where are you? Simone says you're in Albany, but you won't answer our calls. We just want to make sure you're safe. Please come home. We can work this out together. As a family." The third voicemail was from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, professional, detached. "Ms. Townsend, this is Dr. Sarah Vance from Eastside Psychiatric Associates. Your daughters have expressed serious concerns about your mental health and have requested an emergency evaluation. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to schedule an appointment. If we don't hear from you within 48 hours, we may need to pursue involuntary assessment under New York mental hygiene law." I sat on the bed, the phone shaking in my hand. They'd escalated. They weren't just telling neighbors I was unstable. They were building an actual medical case. Finding doctors willing to sign off on evaluations I'd never consented to. Using laws designed to protect vulnerable people as weapons. I called Raymond. "They've contacted a psychiatrist," I told him, my voice surprisingly steady. "They're threatening involuntary commitment." Raymond cursed, which was unusual for him. "That's aggressive, but it's also risky on their part." Involuntary commitment requires substantial evidence of imminent danger. Your daughters are overplaying their hand. It doesn't feel like overplaying. It feels like I'm being erased. I know, but Grace, here's what you need to understand. The more aggressive they get, the more evidence we have of malicious intent. They're not acting like concerned daughters. They're acting like people trying to seize assets. Any judge will see that. When can we file? I already did. Emergency motion for return of property, restraining order, and a preliminary injunction preventing them from accessing your apartment or making statements about your mental health. Hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. But Grace, you need to come back. You need to be present, lucid, clearly competent. Can you do that? Yes, I said. The funeral is tomorrow morning. I'll take the afternoon train back. Good. And Grace, don't engage with them. Don't answer their calls. Don't respond to their texts. Anything you say can and will be twisted. Let me handle the communication. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The bed and breakfast was quiet, just the sound of old pipes and someone walking around upstairs. Through the window, I could see the Catholic cemetery across the street, dark shapes of headstones under a cloudy sky. I thought about my mother, about the way she'd held on to faith even when it seemed pointless, about the way she'd forgiven my father every time he'd disappointed her, every time he'd chosen whiskey over his family, every time he'd promised to change and didn't. She'd called it grace. I'd called it weakness. But maybe there was a difference between forgiving and forgetting. Maybe you could extend mercy without letting people destroy you. Maybe... My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Grace Townsend? Yes? This is Detective Maria Santos from the NYPD's 20th Precinct. I understand your daughters filed a missing persons report? My heart stopped. I'm not missing. I'm in Albany for my mother's funeral. I see. And you're there voluntarily? Of course I'm here voluntarily. This is, Detective, my daughters are trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. They broke into my apartment, removed my property, and are now using law enforcement to harass me while I'm burying my mother. There was a pause. When Detective Santos spoke again, her voice was different, less official, more human. Ms. Townsend, I'm required to verify your safety. Your daughters presented some compelling evidence of concerning behavior. But I'm also hearing something else in your voice. Would you be willing to come to the precinct when you return to New York? Just to give your side of things? I have a lawyer, I said. Raymond Kellerman. He's filing motions on Monday. That's smart. Look, Ms. Townsend, off the record, I've seen this before. Adult children who decide their parents are inconvenient. It usually involves money or property. If that's what's happening here, you should know that making false statements to police is a crime. And elder abuse is something we take very seriously. Elder abuse, I repeated. I'm 58. Age is just a number. Exploitation is exploitation. She paused. I'm sorry about your mother. Take care of yourself. She hung up, and I sat there holding the phone, trying to process what had just happened. A police detective had essentially told me that my daughters were credible enough to file reports, but suspicious enough to investigate. I was both the victim and the suspect, both the endangered person and the potential threat. I wanted to call them. God help me. I wanted to call Simone and Audrey and ask them why. When had I become the enemy? When had they decided that the woman who'd raised them, who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for their college, who'd loved them with every broken piece of her heart, when had that woman become someone who needed to be neutralized? But I didn't call. I remembered Raymond's advice. I remembered that everything could be used against me. So instead, I got ready for bed. I said a prayer for my mother, the first real prayer I'd said in years, and I tried to sleep. Tomorrow I would bury her. Tomorrow I would stand beside her grave and say goodbye. And the day after that, I would go to war. The morning of the funeral was gray and cold, the kind of October day that promises winter. I dressed in my black suit, the one I'd bought for my father's funeral 17 years ago, and took a cab to St. Catherine's. The church was small, built in the 1950s with that practical Catholic architecture. Nothing fancy, just brick and stained glass and a statue of the Virgin Mary with her hands outstretched in perpetual welcome. Michael and Thomas were already there, standing in the parking lot with their wives. I'd met Diane and Patricia maybe 5 times each, pleasant women who'd sent condolence cards and seemed genuinely sorry for my loss. They hugged me, murmured sympathies, said my mother was in a better place now. Inside, the The church was about half full. More people than I'd expected for a woman who'd spent her last years largely forgotten, isolated in a nursing home. But she'd been part of this community for 60 years. She'd volunteered at the parish school, had been in the Ladies' Altar Society, had brought casseroles to every funeral and birth and crisis. People remembered. Father Dominic conducted a beautiful service. He spoke about Margaret Townsend's faith, her kindness, her quiet strength. He read the passages she'd chosen, the psalm about walking through the valley of the shadow of death and fearing no evil, the gospel about the house with many rooms. A woman from the choir sang Ave Maria, her voice cracking slightly on the high notes, but full of genuine emotion. I sat in the front pew between my brothers and tried to feel something other than numb. I should have been crying. I should have been devastated. But all I could think about was Monday morning, about the hearing, about what I was going to say when I finally faced my daughters. At the cemetery, under that oak tree my parents had chosen, we stood in the cold while Father Dominic said the final prayers. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The earth that would cover my mother's casket was frozen, hard with the coming winter. The gravediggers waited at a respectful distance, leaning on their shovels. Michael spoke first, sharing a memory about Mom teaching him to ride a bike. Thomas talked about her cooking, the way she'd made Sunday dinners feel like celebrations even when there was barely enough money for groceries. Then everyone looked at me. I hadn't prepared anything. I'd been too focused on survival to think about eulogies. But standing there, I found words. My mother believed in second chances, I said, my voice carrying in the cold air. She believed that no matter how badly you messed up, no matter how far you fell, you could always come back. She believed in forgiveness, in grace. I paused, looking at the casket. I'm not sure I inherited that from her. I think I got more of my father's stubbornness, his inability to let things go. But she tried to teach me. Even at the end, even when she was barely conscious, she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Let it go, Gracie. Let go, and let God." My voice cracked on the last sentence. Michael put his hand on my shoulder, and that small gesture of solidarity nearly broke me. But I held it together. I made it through the final blessing, through the moment when they lowered her into the ground, through the reception at the parish hall where people ate finger sandwiches and told more stories about a woman who'd been better than any of us deserved. Around 3 p.m., after everyone had left, I went back to my mother's nursing home room. I had to clear it out. That's what Thomas had reminded me about. That's what the administrator had said needed to happen. The room was small, just a bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. Most of her things had already been moved out over the past year, as she'd needed less and less. What remained was mostly paperwork, photographs, a few books. I started with the dresser, old clothes that would go to Goodwill. A jewelry box with costume jewelry, nothing valuable, just the pieces she'd accumulated over a lifetime. A rosary identical to the one in my pocket. And then, in the bottom drawer, wrapped in a plastic bag, letters. I almost didn't open them. They were tied with a ribbon, the envelopes yellowed with age. But something made me sit down in that chair by the window and untie the ribbon, made me pull out the first letter. It was addressed to my mother, dated April 1987. The handwriting was masculine, confident. It was signed, D. David, my ex-husband. My hand started shaking as I read. The letter was love letter, passionate and specific and completely inappropriate for a married man to be writing to his mother-in-law. Except it wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. He talked about our plan, about once Grace is out of the picture, about money and property and futures that didn't include me. I read another letter, then another. There were 12 in total, spanning from 1987 to 1991, the years leading up to my divorce. Each one revealed a little more. David hadn't left me for another woman. He'd left me because my mother had helped him plan it, had encouraged it, had promised to support him financially if he could get custody of the girls. The room tilted. I had to grip the arms of the chair to keep from falling. My mother, my devout, forgiving, grace-filled mother, had tried to help my husband take my children from me. She'd believed I was unfit. Too emotional, David had written in one letter. Not stable enough for the girls. You've said it yourself, Margaret. She's just like your sister Rose. We both know how that ended. Aunt Rose, who'd had a nervous breakdown in the 1960s, who'd been institutionalized, who'd died in a state hospital. The family ghost, the cautionary tale, the proof that the women in our family had weak nerves. My mother had believed I was headed for the same fate, had conspired with my husband to protect my daughters from me. It hadn't worked. David had lost the custody battle, had settled for every other weekend visitation and child support, but not for lack of trying. And my daughters? I pulled out my phone, searched my texts for old conversations. Found one from 2015, Simone writing, "Grandma told me some things about you and Dad, about why he really left. Maybe we should talk." I dismissed it at the time, thought my mother was getting confused in her old age, mixing up stories. But she hadn't been confused. She'd been confessing. Everything suddenly made sense. Why Simone and Audrey had always seemed slightly distant, slightly suspicious. Why they'd believed so easily that I was unstable. Why they'd felt justified in trying to take control of my life. Because their grandmother, their beloved, saintly grandmother, had taught them that I couldn't be trusted, that I was weak, that I was dangerous to myself and others. My mother had planted the seeds of my destruction decades ago, and now my daughters were harvesting the crop. I sat in that nursing home room as the afternoon light faded, and I tried to reconcile the woman I'd just buried with the woman who'd written back to my husband, who'd agreed with his assessment that I was unfit, who'd promised to help in whatever way I can. In one of the last letters, dated just before the divorce was finalized, David had written, "Margaret, you're a saint for trying. But Grace's lawyers are better than mine. I'm going to lose custody. But at least the girls will know the truth. They'll understand who their mother really is." And they did. They'd grown up with that truth whispered in their ears by a grandmother who loved them but didn't trust their mother. They'd been taught from childhood that I was fragile, unstable, someone who needed to be managed. I should have been furious. I should have wanted to burn those letters, to forget what I'd learned, to protect my mother's memory. But instead, I felt something cold and clarifying settle in my chest. Understanding. This wasn't just about my daughter's greed or ambition. This was about generational trauma, about patterns repeated, about a mother who'd loved me but hadn't believed in me, who'd confused strength with silence and vulnerability with weakness. And it meant that when I went back to New York, when I faced Simone and Audrey in that courtroom, I wouldn't just be fighting for my apartment or my property. I'd be fighting to break a cycle, to prove that being emotional wasn't the same as being incompetent, that feeling deeply wasn't a mental illness. I'd be fighting for every woman who'd ever been called crazy for refusing to be silent. I took the letters, all 12 of them, folded them carefully and put them in my bag. Evidence, Raymond would call them. Proof of a pattern of manipulation, of conspiracy to defame. But to me, they were something else. They were permission to stop forgiving, to stop extending grace to people who'd weaponized my mercy against me. My mother had asked me to let go, to let God handle it. But I wasn't my mother. I didn't have her faith, her capacity for forgiveness, her willingness to turn the other cheek. I had something else. Rage. Clarifying, energizing, absolutely justified rage. And I was going to use it. I took the 4:15 train back to New York, watched the Hudson River pass by in reverse, watched the suburbs give way to the city, watched Penn Station rise up to meet me like a concrete welcome. When I emerged onto 34th Street at 6:43 p.m., the city was alive with Friday night energy, people heading to dinners, to bars, to weekend plans. I took the subway to Raymond's office in Midtown. He was waiting for me, along with a paralegal named Jessica, who looked barely old enough to drink but had the sharpest eyes I'd ever seen. I put the letters on his desk. "Read these," I said. "Then tell me what we do next." Raymond read in silence, his expression darkening with each page. When he finished, he looked at Jessica. "Make copies, 3 sets, and get me everything you can find on David Townsend. Financial records, property holdings, any connection to Simone and Audrey's current activities." Then he looked at me. "Grace, these letters change everything. This isn't just about property theft anymore. This is about a decades-long conspiracy to undermine your parental rights and mental health. This is about a pattern of defamation going back to your marriage. We can go after your daughters for elder abuse and theft, yes. But we can also go after their narrative. We can show that this didn't start with your mother's death. It started the day you married their father. What does that mean for Monday's hearing? It means we're not just playing defense anymore. We're going on offense. And Grace? By the time we're done, your daughters are going to wish they'd never taken that desk. I should have felt triumph. I should have felt vindicated. But all I felt was tired. So incredibly, bone-deep tired. "I don't want to destroy them," I said quietly. "I just want them to stop." Raymond's expression softened. "I know. But sometimes, Grace, the only way to make someone stop is to show them you're willing to go as far as they are. Farther, even. I nodded, thanked him, took the copies of the letters, and left his office. Outside, the city was cold and bright, a million lights against the dark sky. I stood on the corner of 47th, and Madison and I made a choice. I could use these letters to destroy my daughters, to expose every lie, to reveal the manipulation, to win so completely that they'd never recover. Or I could use them as leverage, as proof that I wasn't the crazy one, that I'd never been the crazy one, that everything they thought they knew about me was built on lies. And then maybe I could offer them something I'd never been offered, a chance to choose differently. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but a door, left slightly open, for if they ever found the courage to walk through it. My mother would have called that grace. I called it survival. Either way, Monday morning was coming, and I was ready. I didn't go home that Friday night. I couldn't. The thought of walking into that apartment, my sanctuary for 30 years, now violated and emptied, made my skin crawl. Instead, I checked into a small hotel in Murray Hill, the kind of place that rents rooms by the week to people in transition. Divorced men, women fleeing bad situations, people who needed somewhere to be invisible for a while. I was all three. Saturday, I stayed in that hotel room and prepared. I wrote everything down, a timeline starting from my marriage to David in 1985, through the divorce in 1991, through every moment when Simone and Audrey had questioned my stability, my judgment, my right to exist as I was. I organized the letters chronologically. I made notes about what my mother had taken from my apartment, matching Eleanor's photos to my memory of where each item had been. Raymond called twice to check on me. "You need to be sharp on Monday," he reminded me. No visible emotion. Judges don't like crying mothers. They see it as proof of instability. You need to be calm, articulate, clear. Can you do that? Yes, I said, and I meant it. The tears were gone. What remained was something harder, something that wouldn't crack under pressure. Sunday, I went to Mass. I don't know why, force of habit maybe, or my mother's ghost whispering in my ear. I found a small church in the East Village, sat in the back pew, and listened to a priest talk about the prodigal son, about the father who welcomed back the son who'd betrayed him, who'd wasted his inheritance, who'd only returned when he had nowhere else to go. The father didn't ask questions, the priest said, his voice echoing in the half-empty church. He didn't demand explanations or apologies. He just saw his son from far off and ran to him. Ran. Can you imagine the dignity that man sacrificed running like that? But love isn't dignified. Love is reckless. Love is choosing mercy over justice, over and over again. I sat there and thought about my daughters, about whether I could ever run toward them the way that father had, whether I even wanted to. By the time I left the church, I still didn't have an answer. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. I dressed carefully. A navy suit, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who'd been underestimated for too long, a woman who was done apologizing for taking up space. The courthouse was in Lower Manhattan, a gray building that smelled like industrial cleaner and anxiety. Raymond met me outside at 8:30 a.m. carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. "They're already here," he said. "Simone, Audrey, and their lawyers. 3 of them, from what Jessica counted. They're not playing around." Neither are we. Inside, we went through security, then up to the 5th floor. The hallway outside the courtroom was crowded with other cases, other families in crisis. I saw Simone before she saw me. She was standing near the water fountain, talking to a man in an expensive suit. She looked polished, professional, every inch the successful lawyer. When she finally noticed me, her expression shifted. Surprise, then something harder. Audrey was sitting on a bench, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, and for just a second, I saw my little girl. The child who'd climbed into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd made me Mother's Day cards with crooked hearts and glitter. Then she stood up, and the mask slipped back into place. "Mom," she said, walking toward me. "Thank God. We've been so worried." "Don't," I interrupted quietly. "Don't pretend this is about concern." Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones, I thought, or maybe I was just a fool who still wanted to believe my daughters had hearts. "Mom, we love you. We're trying to help. You haven't been yourself since Grandma got sick. We just want—" "You want my apartment," I said. "You want control. You want me declared incompetent so you can manage my assets and my life. Let's at least be honest about what this is. Simone joined us, her heels clicking on the tile floor. Mother, you're being paranoid. This is exactly what we're talking about. Ms. Townsend. One of their lawyers stepped forward, a woman in her 40s with severe glasses and a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I'm Patricia Thornton, representing your daughters. Perhaps we could all speak privately before the hearing? Work out an arrangement that doesn't require judicial intervention? Raymond put his hand on my arm, a gentle warning. But I spoke anyway. What kind of arrangement? Your daughters are willing to return the items they removed from your apartment, with the understanding that you'll undergo a voluntary psychiatric evaluation. If the evaluation shows you're competent and capable, this all goes away. No one files any motions, no one pursues any claims. We all just move forward. And if the evaluation shows I'm not competent? Patricia Thornton smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. Then we discuss what's best for everyone involved, including you. No, I said. Absolutely not. Mom, Audrey started. I'm not crazy, I said, my voice rising slightly before I caught myself and lowered it again. I'm not incompetent. I'm not unstable. I'm grieving my mother, and I'm angry that my daughters used that grief to try to steal from me. Those are normal, healthy emotions, and I won't let you pathologize them. See? Simone said to her lawyer, but loudly enough for me to hear. This is what we mean. The aggression, the paranoia. The truth, I corrected. That's what you mean. I'm telling the truth, and you don't like it. Raymond squeezed my arm tighter. This conversation is over. We'll see you in court. We walked away, and I heard Patricia Thornton say something to Simone in a low voice. When I glanced back, all three of my daughter's lawyers were huddled together, and Simone looked furious. Good. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, just a handful of benches and a judge's bench that seemed too large for the space. The judge was a woman in her 60s, black, with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every possible story and believed none of them until proven otherwise. This is Judge Maria Henderson, Raymond whispered. Tough but fair. She doesn't like games, so don't try to manipulate her with emotion. Just facts. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Simone, Audrey, and their legal team took the defense table. The air between us felt electric with all the things we couldn't say. Judge Henderson entered and we all stood. She sat, gestured for us to do the same, and looked at her papers with the weary expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. This is a hearing on an emergency motion for return of property and a restraining order, she said. Mr. Kellerman, you're representing Grace Townsend? Yes, Your Honor. And Ms. Thornton, you're representing... She glanced at her papers. Simone Crawford and Audrey Mitchell? That's correct, Your Honor. Then let's hear what this is about. Raymond stood. Your Honor, this case involves a clear instance of theft and defamation. While my client was in Albany burying her mother, her daughters entered her apartment without permission and removed valuable property. They also made false statements to neighbors and law enforcement, claiming Ms. Townsend was mentally unstable and posed a danger to herself. These statements have damaged my client's reputation and caused her significant emotional distress. Patricia Thornton stood. Your Honor, Ms. Crawford and Ms. Mitchell were acting out of genuine concern for their mother's welfare. Ms. Townsend has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. Objection, Raymond said. No foundation for that claim. Sustained, Judge Henderson said. Ms. Thornton, unless you have evidence of this erratic behavior, please stick to the facts of this case. We have testimony from Dr. Sarah Vance. Has Dr. Vance examined Ms. Townsend? Patricia Thornton hesitated. Not formally, but based on the information provided by her daughters. So no, Judge Henderson said. Next argument. I watched Patricia Thornton's confidence flicker. This wasn't going the way they'd expected. They'd thought they could waltz into court with their expensive suits and their confident assertions, and a judge would just nod along. But Judge Henderson was already unimpressed. Your Honor, Patricia tried again. Ms. Townsend's daughters removed items from her apartment to prevent her from harming herself. The items in question included sharp objects, medications, a desk, I said quietly, before I could stop myself. Judge Henderson looked at me. Ms. Townsend, you'll have a chance to speak, but I'll allow it. What desk? My mother's writing desk, I said, standing up. Raymond touched my arm, but I kept going. It's a family heirloom. My mother specifically left it to me in her will. It has no sharp edges, no dangerous properties. It's just a desk. a beautiful antique desk that my daughters decided they wanted. Your Honor, Patricia started. I'd like to see this will, Judge Henderson said. Do you have it with you? Raymond handed her a copy. She read it slowly, her expression unchanging, then looked at Simone and Audrey. It says here very clearly that Margaret Townsend left her writing desk to Grace Townsend. Was this desk among the items you removed? Simone stood. Yes, Your Honor, but we were planning to return it. You were just stealing it, Judge Henderson said flatly. Let's not dress this up as concern. You took something that didn't belong to you, that your mother, your grandmother, explicitly left to your mother. The courtroom was silent. I could hear Audrey's breathing, quick and shallow. Mr. Kellerman, Judge Henderson continued, what other items were taken? Photographs, personal documents, jewelry. We have a complete list, Your Honor, along with photographs of the apartment before and after, provided by a neighbor who witnessed the removal. And these statements to neighbors and police, do you have evidence of those? Yes, Your Honor. Written statements from 3 neighbors, as well as text messages and voicemails from Ms. Crawford and Ms. Mitchell, threatening to have their mother committed. Judge Henderson looked at the defense table with something that might have been discussed. Ms. Thornton, I'm going to ask you a simple question, and I want a simple answer. Do your clients have any actual evidence that Grace Townsend is incompetent or poses a danger to herself? Patricia Thornton shuffled papers. Your Honor, we have anecdotal evidence. That's not evidence, that's gossip. Do you have medical records, psychiatric evaluations, police reports of self-harm attempts? No, Your Honor, but then we're done here. Judge Henderson picked up her gavel. I'm ordering the immediate return of all property taken from Ms. Townsend's apartment. I'm also issuing a restraining order preventing Ms. Crawford and Ms. Mitchell from entering their mother's home or spreading defamatory statements about her mental health. If they violate this order, they'll be held in contempt. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the DA's office for possible charges of theft and elder abuse. Your Honor? Simone stood up, her voice breaking. She's our mother. We were trying to help. Judge Henderson looked at her with something that might have been pity. Ms. Crawford, I've been a judge for 23 years. I've seen concerned children, and I've seen greedy children. You want to know the difference? Concerned children call their mother's doctor. They arrange for wellness checks. They have conversations. Greedy children call lawyers, hire psychiatrists they've never met to declare their parent incompetent, and start removing property while that parent is burying their grandmother. You're not concerned, you're calculating, and this court sees through it. She banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. All property to be returned within 48 hours. Mr. Kellerman will provide the list. Just like that, it was over. We left the courtroom in silence. Raymond was talking. Something about next steps and filing civil suits, but I couldn't hear him over the rushing in my ears. Behind me, I heard Simone arguing with Patricia Thornton, heard Audrey crying. In the hallway, away from the courtroom, Raymond finally stopped talking and just looked at me. Grace, you won. I know, I said, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in the ruins of something that used to be beautiful. Audrey caught up with me at the elevator. Mom, please, can we talk? Just the 3 of us? I looked at her, really looked at her. She'd lost weight, I noticed. There were circles under her eyes. She looked younger than 31, almost like a child playing dress-up in grown-up clothes. What is there to talk about? I asked quietly. We made a mistake, she said. We listened to the wrong people. We thought, Mom, Grandma told us things about you and Dad, about your mental health. We thought we were protecting you by stealing from me. We weren't. She stopped, seemed to realize how that sounded. The desk was supposed to be temporary. We were going to give it back. We just thought, you thought you'd take it while I was vulnerable and hope I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. I pushed the elevator button, watched the numbers descend. Audrey, do you have any idea what you've done? What you've destroyed? We can fix this. We can... No, I said. The elevator arrived, and I stepped in. You can return my property. You can stop lying to people. But you can't fix this, because the thing you broke wasn't furniture or reputation. It was trust. It was the belief that no matter what else happened in this world, my daughters loved me. You broke that, Audrey, and I don't think it can be repaired. The elevator doors closed on her stricken face. Raymond stood beside me in silence as we descended. In the lobby, he said, You have 48 hours to decide if you want to pursue criminal charges. The DA will need your cooperation. I need to think about it. Grace, they tried to have you committed. They coordinated with your ex-husband to undermine you for decades. Those letters prove conspiracy. You could destroy them, I finished. I know. I could destroy my daughters, put them in prison, ruin their careers, make sure everyone knows exactly what they did. I could do all of that. So why don't you? I thought about the priest's sermon, about the father running to his prodigal son, about Mercy being reckless and undignified, and maybe the hardest thing in the world. Because they're still mine, I said finally. Because somewhere under all the greed and the lies and the manipulation, they're still the little girls who used to fall asleep on my lap. And I don't know if I can be the person who destroys them, even if they deserve it. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's your choice to make. But Grace, don't mistake mercy for weakness. You can choose not to destroy them without letting them back in. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Wednesday afternoon, 2 days after the hearing, there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find a moving company, the same truck that had been there the week before. The movers brought everything back: the desk, the paintings, the boxes of photographs. They set each item down carefully, apologetically, like they understood they'd been part of something shameful. Eleanor came over while they were unloading. She brought soup and bread and a bottle of wine. "Those girls of yours," she said, shaking her head. "I don't understand them, Grace. I truly don't." "Neither do I admitted. We sat at my kitchen table after the movers left, drinking wine and not saying much. It was enough to have her there, to have someone who believed me, who'd stood by me when my own blood hadn't. "My daughter called," Eleanor said after her second glass. "From California. She wanted to know if I needed anything, if I was eating enough, if the weather was bothering my arthritis. You know what I told her? I told her I was fine, but my neighbor, my friend, had just been betrayed by her daughters, and I was more worried about her than about myself. What did she say? She said she couldn't imagine treating me that way, that she'd get on a plane right now if I needed her. And Grace, I believed her, because I raised her to be different, to be kind, to understand that family isn't just blood. It's showing up. It's being there. It's choosing love even when it's hard." I started crying then. Not the ugly sobs from the train, but quiet tears that wouldn't stop falling. Eleanor held my hand across the table and let me cry. "I don't know how to move forward," I said. "I don't know how to be their mother anymore." "Maybe you're not," Eleanor said gently. "Maybe right now you're just Grace, a woman who survived something terrible. And maybe that's enough for today." That night after Eleanor went home, I sat at my mother's desk, back where it belonged, in the corner by the window, and I wrote letters. Not to send, just to process, to say the things I couldn't say in court. "Dear Simone, you were 3 years old when your father left. You cried every night for a month asking when Daddy was coming home. I held you through every one of those tears. I told you everything would be okay, that we'd be fine together, that love doesn't leave just because someone walks out the door. I worked 3 jobs that year. I taught during the day, waitressed at night, cleaned offices on weekends. You never knew about the cleaning. I did it after you and your sister were asleep, came home at 2 a.m. and got up at 6 to make you breakfast. You never knew that I chose between groceries and electricity bills, that I sold my wedding ring to pay for your school supplies. You went to good schools. You had everything you needed and most of what you wanted. You went to Columbia because I'd saved every spare dollar for 15 years. And when you graduated, you thanked your father in your speech. You thanked him for teaching you the value of hard work. You didn't mention me. I told myself it didn't matter. That motherhood wasn't about recognition. It was about sacrifice. That I'd done it for love, not for gratitude. But you know what? I'm tired of sacrificing. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of watching my daughters become the kind of people who would do what you did. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't even know if I want to. What I know is this: you're not the daughter I raised. You're the daughter your father and your grandmother taught you to be. And I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from that lesson. I'm sorry I couldn't teach you something better. Dear Audrey, you were always softer than your sister, more emotional, more open. When you were 7, you told me you wanted to be just like me when you grew up. You said I was the bravest person you knew. What happened to that little girl? When did I become someone to manage instead of someone to love? I know you cried in court. I saw it. And part of me wanted to run to you, to hold you like I did when you were small. But I can't. Because I don't know if those tears were real or if they were just another performance, another manipulation. That's what you've done, Audrey. You've made me doubt everything. Every memory, every moment of love. I look at them now and wonder if they were ever real, or if I was always just a means to an end for you. I hope someday you understand what that feels like. Not because I want you to hurt, but because I want you to know what you've taken from me. It's not just property. It's not just reputation. It's the ability to trust, to believe in goodness, to think that my children loved me for who I am and not what I could give them. You stole my faith in us, and I don't know how to get that back. I didn't send the letters. I folded them up and put them in a drawer, next to the letters from David and my mother. Maybe someday I'd give them to my daughters. Maybe I wouldn't. For now, they were just for me, a way to name what I'd lost, to make it real. Spring came slowly to New York that year. I watched it from my window, saw the trees on West 83rd Street gradually fill with green, saw the neighborhood wake up from winter. I'd kept teaching through everything. My students never knew what I was going through, never saw the court hearings or the sleepless nights. I showed up, I taught American literature, I graded papers. It was the one part of my life that stayed stable. Simone and Audrey returned everything. They complied with the restraining order. They didn't contact me, and I didn't contact them. It was like we'd agreed to a mutual deletion, like we'd decided to pretend the other didn't exist. My brothers called occasionally. They'd heard about the court case. Simone had apparently told them her version, where she was the concerned daughter and I was the irrational mother. I told them the truth, showed them the letters. Michael believed me. Thomas said he needed to hear both sides. I told him that was fine, but he'd have to choose a side eventually. He said he'd rather not choose at all. I stopped waiting for his calls after that. In March, I started going to a support group for estranged parents. It met in a church basement in Chelsea, and it was full of people like me, mothers and fathers whose adult children had cut them off. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for petty ones, sometimes for no clear reason at all. I listened to their stories. A father whose son had accused him of abuse that never happened. A mother whose daughter had stopped speaking to her after she remarried. A couple whose children had systematically isolated them, then sued for access to trust funds. They weren't all innocent. Some of them had made mistakes, had been too controlling or too absent, had damaged their children in ways they were only now beginning to understand. But most of them were like me. Imperfect people who'd loved as well as they knew how, who'd been punished for their failures and never credited for their successes. You have to let go of the hope, one woman told me over bad coffee after a meeting. Her name was Patricia, and her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. That's the hardest part. Letting go of the hope that they'll change, that they'll apologize, that they'll suddenly see you clearly and come back. How do you do that? I asked. You grieve, she said simply. You grieve the daughters you thought you had. You bury them, the way you'd bury anyone else you've lost, and then you figure out how to live without them. It sounded impossible, but I tried. I let myself feel the loss, fully and completely. I cried when I needed to. I raged when I had to. I sat with the emptiness and learned to live inside it. And slowly, so slowly I barely noticed at first, I started to heal. In April, on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was golden and the city felt almost peaceful, there was another knock on my door. I opened it to find Audrey standing in the hallway. She looked different, thinner, older, her hair shorter than I remembered. She was holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there, one hand on the door, ready to close it if necessary. "What do you want?" "To apologize," she said. "Really apologize. Not the bullshit I said in court. Not the excuses. Just, I'm sorry. For all of it." "Okay," I said. Not accepting it, just acknowledging it. "Can I come in? Just for a minute?" Every instinct screamed no. This was how it always started. The apologies, the promises, the slow erosion of boundaries until you found yourself back where you began, hurt and betrayed, and wondering how you let it happen again. But I thought about my mother, about how she'd always left the door open for my father, for my brothers, for me. how mercy had been her superpower, even when it looked like weakness. I stepped back, let her in. She sat on the edge of my couch, the same spot where she'd sat that night when I'd come home from Penn Station. She looked around at the apartment, at all the things that had been returned. Her eyes landed on the desk. "Grandma's desk," she said. "I remember when she promised it to you. I was maybe 10. We were visiting her in Bay Ridge, and you were sitting at that desk helping her with something. Bills, I think. And she put her hand on your shoulder and said, 'Someday this will be yours, Gracie. Take care of it.' You cried. I didn't understand why then. I didn't just want the desk," I said quietly. "I wanted the promise. I wanted to believe she saw me, that I was worth remembering." Audrey nodded. "I found more letters. After the hearing, in Grandma's things that we'd put in storage. Letters between her and Dad, but also letters between her and Simone. Mom, she was. She was poisoning us against you for years, since we were teenagers. Little comments, little suggestions that you weren't stable, that we needed to protect ourselves." She pulled out the brown paper package and handed it to me. Inside were more letters, dozens of them. I didn't read them. I couldn't. Not right then. "I didn't want to believe it at first," Audrey continued. "I didn't want to think that Grandma, this woman I loved, who took us to church and taught us prayers and always seemed so kind, that she would be so cruel. But it's all there, the manipulation, the lies, the way she turned us against you. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know I understand now. I understand that we weren't just being greedy or opportunistic. We were being," she paused, searching for the word, "programmed, groomed, taught to see you as the enemy. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry we believed it." I sat down in the chair by the desk. My hands were shaking. "Is Simone sorry?" Audrey hesitated. "No. She still thinks we were right. She thinks the court got it wrong, that Judge Henderson was biased. She's not ready to see it yet. I don't know if she ever will be. And you? What changed for you?" "Therapy," Audrey said. "A lot of therapy. And Trevor left me." I looked up, surprised. "What?" "He left me 2 months ago. Said I'd become too negative, too focused on family drama. Turns out when you marry someone for their confidence and success, and they have a complete breakdown, they're not that interested in staying." She laughed, but it was bitter. "Karma, I guess." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Even after everything, I didn't want her to hurt. Don't be. It was probably the best thing that could have happened, because it made me realize I married someone just like Dad. Someone who loved me when I was useful and left when I wasn't. And I treated you the same way. I loved you when you were the mom who took care of everything and abandoned you when you needed me. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, sirens, construction, the sound of people living their lives. Inside, 2 women tried to figure out if love could be rebuilt from ruins. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Audrey said finally. "I'm not asking for a relationship or for us to go back to how things were. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, and I'm trying to be better." "Better for who?" I asked. "For me? Or for yourself?" She thought about it. "For myself, I guess, which probably makes me selfish, but maybe that's where it has to start. Being someone I can live with, and I couldn't live with who I'd become." I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd carried, raised, sacrificed for, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something like the possibility of forgiveness. A door, cracked open, letting in a sliver of light. "I need time," I said. "I need to decide if I can do this. If I can let you back in without losing myself again." "I understand," Audrey said. She stood up, moved toward the door. Then she turned back. "Mom, thank you for letting me say this. For not slamming the door in my face. I know I didn't deserve it." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." After she left, I sat at my mother's desk and opened the new letters. Read about the systematic undermining, the careful construction of a narrative that painted me as unstable. Read my mother's handwriting. The girls need to understand that Grace isn't equipped to make good decisions. We're helping them by protecting them from her. I should have been angry. I should have felt rage, betrayal, all the things I'd felt 6 months ago. But instead, I just felt tired and sad. Sad for my mother, who'd been so damaged by her own upbringing that she'd passed that damage onto her granddaughters. Sad for my daughters, who'd been taught to fear the very thing they needed most: authentic, messy, imperfect love. And sad for myself, for all the years I'd spent trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to prove I was stable and controlled and not too much. For all the times I'd silenced my own emotions because I was afraid of confirming their worst beliefs about me. I thought about what Eleanor had said, about how maybe I was just Grace right now. Not a mother, not a daughter, not a teacher or ex-wife or any other role. Just a woman who'd survived something terrible and was learning to live with the scars. That felt true. That felt like enough. I never pressed criminal charges. I let the DA's referral die on the vine, decided that some justice wasn't worth the cost of pursuing it. Simone and Audrey paid to have the apartment professionally cleaned, replaced the items that couldn't be returned, settled a small civil suit for emotional damages. It was transactional, cold, but it was closure. Audrey and I started having lunch once a month. Nothing heavy, nothing therapeutic, just lunch. We talked about safe things at first: her new job, my students, the weather. Gradually, we got deeper. We talked about her divorce, about my mother, about the ways we'd both been shaped by women who loved us but didn't know how to show it. I didn't tell her everything. I kept parts of myself protected, boundaries in place that I wasn't ready to dissolve. She understood. Or at least, she didn't push. Simone didn't come around. I heard through Audrey that she'd moved to Boston, taken a job at a firm there. She said she needed a fresh start, Audrey told me. Somewhere people didn't know about. You know, the court case. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Simone had made her choice. Maybe someday she'd make a different one. Or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I couldn't wait for her. I started dating, tentatively, awkwardly, like a teenager learning how all over again. A colleague from the college, a kind man named Robert who taught history and collected vintage records. Nothing serious. Nothing that required me to be anything other than myself. It was nice. Easy. Uncomplicated. I went to therapy for the first time since Dr. Rashid. Found a woman named Dr. Patel who specialized in family estrangement and complex trauma. She helped me understand that I didn't have to choose between protecting myself and leaving the door open, that I could do both, that boundaries weren't walls, they were guidelines for how I wanted to be treated. You get to decide what reconciliation looks like, she told me. You get to decide if it happens at all. Your daughters don't get a vote, not anymore. That felt radical, revolutionary, the idea that I had power here, that I could choose what shape my life took without seeking permission or approval. I chose carefully. I chose boundaries. I chose honesty over peace. I chose myself. And it turned out, choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. My mother's desk sits by the window now, where the afternoon light hits it just right. I sit there most mornings with coffee, watching the city wake up, writing in the journal Dr. Patel suggested I keep. I write about the past. Yes. But more and more, I write about the present, about the life I'm building from the wreckage. I found something last week tucked in a secret compartment I didn't know existed. A letter, in my mother's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before she died. It was addressed to me. Dear Gracie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. While waiting for the train to my mother's funeral, I received a message. Your daughters are emptying your apartment, telling the neighbors you've gone crazy. When I returned, I took an action that would change everything.